It's 1524. As imperialist forces led by Bourbon besiege Marseille, Francis I, King of France, gathers an army of 40,000 to counter the invaders. As he heads south, the numerically inferior imperialists break off the siege and head back to Italy. Francis follows them and crosses the Alps in October. The imperial army manages to escape, however Lannoy, the captain general of the army, decides he can't hold Milan. Instead, he leaves behind a substantial force of 9,000 to defend Pavia and retreats to Lodi with the rest of the army. Francis enters Milan unopposed. His war council recommends he continues the pursuit of the imperial army. However, on the advice of Bonnivet, Francis decides to instead reduce Pavia first. The king takes most of his forces and on October the 31st begins to lay siege to Pavia. A few days later, the French build a pontoon bridge across the Ticino and surround the city on 4 sides. Soon enough, 2 breaches are made in the walls of the city and the French begin their assault. The attack is beaten back with heavy casualties, so the French decide to starve out the defenders. Antonio de Leyva, the commander of the garrison, is well prepared for a long siege, with enough food and ammunition to last him until next year. While the siege is going on, other opportunities present themselves. There is turmoil in Genoa, with fighting between the pro-French and pro-Habsburg factions of the city. Francis decides to capitalize on the events and sends a detachment to help out the pro-French faction. With the assistance of the Genoese admiral Andrea Doria, the French occupy the city and oust the pro-imperialists. Emboldened by this success, Francis decides, against the advice of his counselors, to also send a contingent to Naples. 5,000 soldiers are dispatched to Naples, a number that is made up by the arrival of the Black Bands, an elite Italian musketeer unit who have been fighting for the emperor until then. Francis also makes a secret pact with Pope Clement VII, who promises free passage to the French army. Clement is still officially on the emperor's side. However, this is more due to fear than loyalty. Francis also receives supplies of gunpowder from his longtime ally, the Duke of Ferrara. As the French army marches south, Lannoy tries to intercept them, but he is in turn intercepted by the French and is forced to retreat after taking heavy casualties. In January, the fortunes of the 2 armies begin to turn. 5,000 Swiss leave the French army, while the imperial army receives a reinforcement of 16,000 Landsknechts. Pescara insists that since the 2 armies are now evenly matched, they must first strike the main French army and worry about the contingent marching to Naples later. Thus the imperialists begin their march to Pavia, reaching the outskirts of the city on the 3rd of February 1525. Although short on money and gunpowder, de Leyva is still holding out with around 6,000 soldiers. The besieging French army numbers around 25,000. Heavy artillery is placed in the fortified redoubts to the east and to the west of the city. 5,000 French are stationed to the west of the city. Around 6,000 Swiss and 1,000 light cavalry are to the east of the city at the abbeys and at Porta Gallo, backed up by some field artillery. A small contingent of around 1,000 is guarding the southern access to the city. Francis himself is stationed in a large park to the north of the city with 3,600 men-at-arms, 3,000 Landsknechts, 2,000 French infantry, and substantial artillery. Visconti Park stretches for around 3 miles and is surrounded by a 5-meter wall. At its center is Mirabello Castle, a small medieval fortification. A road and a small stream bisect the park with patches of woodland and marshy areas here and there. The imperial army, also numbering around 25,000, sets up to the east of the park. 3 weeks are spent with tentative attacks and skirmishing. A small troop of light cavalry manages to sneak into the city, bringing orders and much-needed supplies to the defenders. By the 3rd week of February, the situation is getting dire for the imperialists. Money is running out, and the garrison is short on supplies. By this time, Pescara is in effect in command. He concludes that retreat without a battle is an impossible option, as the garrison would soon be overrun and his army might break up for lack of pay and low morale. He decides he must attack the French by surprise, and he must strike them where it hurts the most, in the middle. His plan is to covertly march by night to the back of the park where the French least expect an attack, breach the walls, enter with a substantial contingent backed up by a rearguard, and assault Mirabello Castle. He believes this might be the headquarters of the French king. If he can capture the king and link up with the garrison, this might so demoralize the French that they will give up the siege and retreat. On the 9th of February the 23rd, 1525, Pescara marches north to meet his destiny. The lead force of 3,000 Italian musketeers is designated with taking Mirabello. They are backed up by 1,000 light cavalry and light artillery. Heavy cavalry and infantry follow closely behind. The vanguard reaches the back of the park by 5 a.m. Spanish engineers are already hard at work breaching the park's wall as silently as possible. Pescara had left behind a small contingent with the heavy artillery and ordered them to make as much noise as possible to mask his movement and the noise created by his engineers. Even so, French scouts notice the marching army. However, the commander of the Swiss concludes this must be a retreat and decides not to inform the king. Pescara had chosen a heavily wooded area of the park to create the breach, so this activity remains completely hidden from the French. Pescara's musketeers soon entered the park and moved towards Mirabello in the concealment of the forest. The light cavalry and the artillery move out into the open to the left of the musketeers. This is inevitably noticed by the French. The commander in the east alerts the king that the Spanish are in the park and orders 3,000 Swiss and the light cavalry to form up for battle. The French light cavalry charges the imperial light cavalry. When the Swiss arrive, the cavalry and the gun crews break and retreat towards the main army. By dawn, the gates of the park have been opened and more imperialist soldiers pour into the park. The musketeers easily take Mirabello, however they fail to capture the king since he is in the northwest with his cavalry. Suddenly the imperial artillery stops firing. Then after a couple of minutes silence, 3 shots ring out in short sequence. This is the cue for the defenders of Pavia to sally out. They charge outside with great determination, catching the 3,000 Swiss to the right by surprise. They occupy the narrowest position between the walls and a stream, cutting off the Swiss from the rest of the army. Meanwhile, the imperial artillery outside the walls and within pours down fire in support. The musketeers at Mirabello try to link up with them, but heavy fire from the French guns at Portogallo forces them to back off. As dawn breaks, a heavy mist covers the battlefield. Bonnivet rides out and, seeing the imperial cavalry routed, reports back to Francis that all is well, the enemy has been suppressed. Unbeknown to him, Pescara has already entered the park with 8,000 Spanish infantry and Landsknechts and 1,600 heavy cavalry. Frundsberg has also entered with 8,000 Landsknechts to face the Swiss. Outnumbered 2-1, the Swiss fight doggedly in a desperate push of Pike where no prisoners are taken and no quarter is given. Inevitably, the Swiss are beaten and forced to retreat to Portogallo, closely followed by the Landsknechts of Frundsberg. Meanwhile, the French forces with the king form up for battle. As the imperial heavy cavalry and Pescara's infantry emerge from the woods, Francis orders a charge. The French heavy cavalry charges the imperial heavy cavalry. After a short and bloody engagement, the imperialist horse rout, and Pescara's infantry is forced to take cover in the woods. The French artillery would be in perfect position to fire on them, but with the king so close to the enemy, they are forbidden to do so. Pescara's Spanish musketeers, on the other hand, are in a perfect position to fire on the French. As the Landsknechts in French service catch up with the cavalry, Pescara orders the musketeers at Mirabello to fire on their flank. He also asks for help from Frundsberg, who defeated the Swiss to such a degree that he can send 4,000 Landsknechts to relieve Pescara. Meanwhile, Bourbon circles around on the other flank with another group of infantry. Now the French are in a double pincer. The men-at-arms refuse to retreat. The Landsknechts in French service can't retreat, because the Landsknechts in Imperial service view them as traitors. No quarter is given, and the French Landsknechts are annihilated. Baron after baron falls around the French king as the Imperialist ring tightens. Francis's horse falls and traps the king underneath it. The King of France is a captive now. The few men who managed to escape alert the French commander in the west, who has been oblivious to what was happening until now. The commander immediately realizes that all is lost and orders the remaining French to retreat. On the other side, the two groups of Swiss are running for their lives. The pontoon bridge collapses as the Landsknechts are in hot pursuit. Many Swiss drown trying to swim across the ice-cold river, others are cut down by their pursuers. The French have lost half of their army, most of the nobles of their country, and the King of France. This is a defeat of the magnitude of Poitiers or Agincourt. Pescara's daring plan had worked. By taking the center of the battlefield and properly exploiting his initial advantage, he completely paralyzed the decision-making process of the French, then defeated them in detail. Superior tactics and strategy, better weapons, better coordination, the ability to exploit advantages as they come, and the ineptitude of the French command all played a part in this victory. After their defeat, the French pull out of Italy. However, the victors also have their own problems. As soon as the battle ends, the victorious troops of the imperial army, whose pay had been in arrears for a long time, start to riot. Pescara, the only man who could have held things together, languishes from his wounds and dies by the end of the year. Bourbon is put in overall command. Charles plans to exploit his victory mainly on the financial front. He intends to extort the Italian states and force them to pay for their own occupation. Needless to say, the Italian states are not happy. The first one to suffer is Francesco Sforza. He gets involved in a plot against the emperor, and when this is discovered, all his lands are taken away. However, for now, this is the most Charles can do, as his unpaid soldiers simply refuse to fight. Meanwhile, Francis is transported to Madrid, where he languishes in captivity until he accepts the terms put forth by Charles. These are complete cessation of hostilities, a renunciation of all French claims in Italy, and the handing over of the Duchy of Burgundy. Francis grudgingly signs the treaty, however reneges on it as soon as he is released, claiming he simply does not have the authority to give Burgundy away. In any case, the emperor doesn't have the money to field an army to take it. While Francis was in captivity, Francis's mother had been in charge. She proved to be quite the able diplomat, convincing the English that an all-powerful emperor would not be in their best interest. Therefore, Henry VIII cancels his plan to attack France, meaning the kingdom's north is secure for now. More controversially, she also opens negotiations with the Ottomans. Suleiman the Magnificent, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, concludes that with the main European powers occupied, the time is ripe to strike at the heart of Europe. His plan is to take Vienna and invade the rest of Europe from there. To get to Vienna, however, he first has to deal with Hungary, an ally of the emperor. The alliance with France gives him a perfect pretext to attack, not that he needed one. On the 29th of August 1526, he crushes the Hungarian army at Mohacs under eerily similar circumstances to the Battle of Pavia. Hungarian knights are cut to pieces by Janissary musketeers. The king himself is killed, together with most of his nobility. After this battle, the country will be split in three. The central part will be occupied by the Ottomans. The western part will be used by Archduke Ferdinand, the emperor's brother, as a buffer zone. And the east with Transylvania will struggle to exist as a quasi-independent principality. Back in Italy, the Pope has other things on his mind. In May 1526, he organizes the Holy League of Cognac, an anti-imperialist alliance with the participation of the Papal States, France, Venice, Florence, and the Sforza. For now, the emperor can do little against this league, as his army is still mutinous and is barely sufficient to hold on to Milan. Things improve somewhat by the end of the year. Frundsberg arrives with 16,000 Landsknechts, most of them Protestants. Charles now has a large army in Italy, however he still doesn't have the means to pay them. His soldiers riot and attack Bourbon. Frundsberg is exasperated and suffers a nervous breakdown. When the Pope attacks Naples, it gives Charles a perfect pretext to send them south. The Protestant Landsknechts are eager to go south to punish the Pope and also to finally make up for their missing pay via the riches of Florence and Rome. As they march south, the League army closely shadows them. However, most of their forces are Venetians, who are not at all eager to go into a decisive battle that they might lose. Through clever maneuvering, they beat the imperial army to Florence and set up a strong defensive position there. Bourbon has no other choice but to press on south. When he reaches Rome, he demands the Pope surrender and pay up. Clement refuses, in spite of only having 3,000 militia to defend against the 20,000 seasoned soldiers of Bourbon. On the 6th of May 1527, the imperial army assaults the city and takes it after a brief fight. Bourbon is one of the few imperial soldiers to die. Now the already mutinous army is without a leader who can control it. The Landsknechts run amok and kill 10,000 civilians, pillaging everything that can be carried. Soon they are joined by bandits, and the killing, raping and pillaging goes on for months. The League army, ever cautious, fails to intervene. Clement just barely escapes the sack and surrenders in June, agreeing to pay as much as is needed. To compound his problems, in the same time the Medici are ousted from Florence. Clement too is a Medici, and his family losing their ancestral homeland hurts him the most. When news of the sack of Rome reaches Charles, he is deeply regretful. When Francis hears of it, he sees an opportunity. He immediately puts together a large army and sends Lautrec to aid the Pope. The French go directly to Genoa and take the city. Next they make a detour to Pavia, capture it and sack it without mercy as revenge for their king's humiliation that was suffered there. Instead of finishing off the imperialists in Milan, Lautrec, now joined by the Venetians, marches south. Since the Pope already sued for peace, the army sent to help him instead turns to Naples. In early 1528, the League army crosses into Naples. By this time, plague had broken out in Rome. Many in the mutinous imperial army had died, others had left for home. The emperor appoints Philibert of Chalon, the Prince of Orange commander, who finally manages to restore order. By now he only has 12,000 troops against Lautrec's 20,000. He has no other choice but to retreat to Naples and face a siege. The Venetians take Abruzzi and Apulia, while the French besiege Naples. In spite of a naval blockade, the imperialists manage to sneak in supplies from Sicily. By clever diplomacy, the Genoan admiral Andrea Doria is brought to the imperial side. Soon the besiegers turn out to be the besieged. Lautrec's army shrinks to 7,000 and is forced to retreat. Orange mercilessly pursues the exhausted French, killing or capturing most of them. De Leyva also receives reinforcements and goes on the attack, clearing out the last League strongholds in Milan. Andrea Doria takes Genoa and installs a pro-imperialist government. The French invade again, however their army is so small this time they are only able to capture and sack Pavia once more. In June 1529 the French are sent reinforcements, however these are intercepted and destroyed by De Leyva. Francis sees the inevitable and is finally ready to concede. Negotiations for peace are conducted by Francis's mother Louise of Savoy and Charles's aunt Margaret of Austria. Francis agrees to renounce all claims to Italy, he agrees to pay a large indemnity and to send ships to the fleet bringing Charles to his coronation as Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope. In return, the imperial claim to the Duchy of Burgundy is dropped. In 1529, Charles disembarks in Genoa with a large army. He meets the Pope in Bologna and after his coronation agrees to help Clement with restoring Florence to the Medici. Orange is dispatched to lay siege to the city. With the Ottomans closing in on Vienna, Charles is eager to settle things and departs for Germany. After a 10-month siege, Florence surrenders. The Medici are back and pledge to help out the emperor with a large sum of money. Peace is concluded with Venice after Charles agrees to restore Francesco Sforza to Milan, knowing well that after the childless duke dies, Milan will revert to him. Venice agrees to hand back the cities in Naples it still holds, and both Italian states agree to pay a substantial indemnity. Charles forms the Italian League, a coalition of all Italian states that is explicitly intended to make Italy pay for its own occupation. Peace finally comes back to the land after 45 years of on and off fighting. But this is only an illusion. Peace will only be for some. For others, war will continue for another 30 years.